The person who designed this camera actually put into consideration how you hold the camera. So there's a way to hold the camera and there's a way not to hold the camera. Make sure to have a support underneath so that you are not leaving this hand to get tired. One particular mistake that a lot of photographers actually make is the need to be fancy when using a camera. But you cannot actively shoot a wedding and shoot it well while shooting on this mode. People now actually relegate the hand that is meant to hold the camera underneath and then they turn it into the hand that taps the screen. After a while, you discover that your hand will start shaking, your pictures will get shaky. Just turn your camera screen to yourself so you can have ease. And then you know your LED screen is actually protected from anyone hitting your screen. It may end in tears and it may not end in tears, but my advice is actually just flip your screen. It's not worth it. Today's class is about understanding your camera. This is somewhat of a practical class. Looking at the camera that is now we're discussing. In our last class on understanding your camera, we discussed the makings of a camera. In fact, we discussed the history of a camera, how a camera came to be this. You understand? We did not always have this. We had very bulky camera, very big camera. In fact, it was in a box. But then after a while, after different innovations, inventions, and all of those things, then we now have this camera. From the box camera, we did not just move on to this. We actually moved from the box camera to the analog camera, then to the digital camera. And even the digital camera, like even after the digital camera, that was when we now had the mirrorless camera. And who knows, last time we spoke about this, I said, who knows what's going to happen next? Someone may just invent a glass. Now we have meta glasses, but imagine if you could get the resolution on this, on meta glasses. So just like she's wearing glasses, she's already recording. She just has to tick a button, then she's already recording. Do you understand what I'm saying? So yeah, understanding your camera. Basically, what I want to talk about today is more of a psychological thing. When a lot of people see cameras, they feel like it's quite overwhelming. And then if you look at recent cameras, like cinema cameras, all of these cameras, you discover that there's a whole lot of buttons, like there's a whole lot of functions, and then if you don't know how to use them, you're just tired already. Like, what should I do with this? Do you understand? How should I work this camera? Well, the first thing I actually want to tell you is that if you are first demoralized at the sight of seeing so many buttons on a camera, then you're already out of the game. There's a saying I always used to make, and this is something that has stuck with me. I think somebody randomly said it, and the person said it even in an unserious way. The person said, an object that cannot talk cannot think better than me. Do you understand? In fact, the person said it in vernacular. An object that can't talk cannot think better than me. So what that means is that if something is an object and I am of a higher class, you understand, so I have better reasoning, please make all of the videos or make some of the clips in the videos to be landscape, so you can do the 3 measures or 2 measures. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. So basically, that particular saying, the person said it in vernacular. The person was like, if something cannot talk, that thing can't be wiser than me, that has a higher sense of reasoning and can talk. So if I look at a camera like this, I am not first defeated by all of this, even if I hold a brand that I'm not conversant with. Do you understand? I shoot majorly the Canon for pictures and then Sony for videos. So if I get a hold of a Sony camera, I'm not first defeated by the look of it and the many buttons. The first thing that comes to my mind is that these buttons, they were put there to make my life easier. So if I'm first defeated, that means it doesn't work. Now, the first thing I ask myself is that why were these buttons put there? These buttons were actually put there to make my life easier. So all of these buttons that looks quite overwhelming, they were actually put there so that my life can be easier. So there's something that is here. So plus every button, it means my life gets easier with every move of those buttons. Do you understand? Because there was literally a time when it was just a single button, a shorter button, click, shoot. Every other thing had to be done manually. In fact, there was a time when there was no button at all. You just had to roll something to get the image. But then, now you have all of this. So with all of these buttons, now you should know that whoever put this button, whoever manufactured this, actually had it in mind that I really want the system to be easier. Because now, looking at all these buttons, I have a Canon R6 on my hands. So looking at all of these buttons now, it makes it quite easy for me to switch between manual mode, auto mode, sports mode, and the rest modes. Do you understand? It makes it easy for me to switch between video mode and picture mode. Do you understand? It makes me easy to even zoom. So there's a zoom button here. There's a time when there was no zoom button at all. In fact, if you look at the old series of the Canon cameras, so not all of them had the zoom function. Do you understand my point? So if you look at all of this, you discover that all of these were placed there to make your life easier. So how do you best use this camera? That is what we're talking about today. How do you best use this camera? The first thing that you should understand about using a camera is that you should first identify how to hold your camera. I know this may seem quite basic, but not everybody knows how to hold their cameras, because you discover that a lot of people hold the camera like this, and then they place maybe one finger on top of this place and then one under for support, and then they hold it like this. You discover that some people hold their cameras like this, like all 4 fingers holding this grip here, and then their thumb is what presses the shutter button. Do you understand? You discover that some people will go as far as even holding, like they will just do this. It's their middle finger that is on the shutter button. So they will say, no, this one, they are keeping it free to press all these buttons. But the truth about it is that the person who designed this camera actually put into consideration how you hold the camera. So there's a way to hold the camera and there's a way not to hold the camera. Do you understand? There are certain people that hold the camera and then you discover that after like a while, they would press a lot of things that they're not meant to press. They'll touch a lot of things that they're not meant to touch. So instead of doing all of those things, what you should actually do is to learn how to hold your camera properly. And how do you hold your camera properly? So this is actually a grip. This part here is actually a grip, and how it's meant to work. So your pinky and the 2 other fingers that follow are actually meant to go in here. So if you watch, it is the direct fit. No matter how big or small your hand is, this is the direct fit for your hand. And then if you look at the back of the camera, you discover that there's a vacuum here, there's a spot here that there's no button on it. So that is where your thumb goes. Your thumb is meant to rest here. And I'll just tell you the reason why your thumb is meant to rest here. Your thumb is meant to rest here because you have quite a lot of buttons behind. You have some buttons up here too. So it's assumed that you don't have to move your hand from this position to the back to start pressing all of these buttons with these 3 fingers. So you don't have to be doing this. You know, some people still do this. Some people do this where they come and then they use these 3 fingers. Instead, that's not what you're meant to do. You're meant to leave these 3 fingers positioned here. And the reason why these 3 fingers are even here is because you need to grip the camera. The first thing, for you to even use a camera, the camera has to be safe. You have to hold on tight to the camera. The manufacturers actually put a friction here to make sure that your hand is gripping. They put a very rough material here. So to make sure that your hand is gripping it properly. That's why you notice that they don't put a very smooth material. So there's friction there, so your hand can easily grip. So if you turn the back of your camera, you discover that there's a space here for your thumb. So your thumb stays here and it slips here. It doesn't stay on these buttons, it doesn't stay on this one, it slips here. It only moves away from here when you need to move any of these buttons here. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now we've spoken about your 3 fingers. That is your pinky, I don't know what this is, and this one. We've spoken about these 3 fingers, and we've already spoken about your thumb. Now, it leaves us with 1 finger, which is your index finger. So your index finger is actually meant to remain here on top of your shutter button. If you watch, this is a perfect fit. In fact, let me turn my hand. So if you watch, this is a perfect fit for your hand, no matter how you look at it. Like no matter how you choose to, from whichever direction you choose to look at it, you discover that this is a perfect fit for your hand. So now, what is this index finger meant to do? This index finger actually is meant to control all of the buttons on top of your camera. That is this dial button here, your shutter button, all of these buttons that are here, all of these buttons that are here, the record button, there's a record button up here. Your index finger is actually meant to operate all of this. And then you discover that your thumb is now extending to this top button here. So you can use this dial button here on the top. And then if you now have to switch between your modes, that is when you now use both your fingers to turn and switch in between modes. Do you understand? So you don't have to constrain yourself and start stressing yourself to maybe, you can also do this if you have like a big hand or a large hand, or instead of that, I think it's just the dial button, so you can just do that. Now, since we've already established how to hold your camera, there's still one more thing about holding your camera, and that is you have to balance off your camera. Now, this is just a camera body. Imagine we have like a 70-200 lens mounted on this. Now it becomes heavy. Do you understand? In fact, a lot of cameras are quite heavy nowadays because of the many functions in them. If you hold this after a while, in fact, my hand is starting to get tired. So if you watch throughout this whole video, I've been using this to support. Do you understand? So what that means now is that for every single time that you have your camera with you, make sure to have a support underneath so that you're not leaving this hand to get tired. And I'll tell you what happens when your hand gets tired. When your hand gets tired, that means your hand starts to fidget. When your hand gets tired, that means your hand starts to shake. And you don't want that, because first of all, you're going to get shaky pictures. Second of all, it's just going to throw you off balance. You're going to sweat a lot on your hands. But if there's a support underneath your camera, that means you are taking the load off of this hand that actually has to operate something. Now imagine if this was in your hand and you had to operate these two, like both buttons at the same time. I can't keep it still and operate both sides at the same time, like the buttons in front, the buttons behind, and the buttons in front. But for me to do that, if I just place my hand here, that means I can fully do that. Do you understand? So there's a support underneath. Now I want to talk about one particular mistake that a lot of photographers actually make, is the need to be fancy when using a camera. And that's why you discover that for cameras that have like a flip screen just like this, you discover that a lot of photographers actually leave their screen like this. So take for instance, you're a wedding photographer, you leave your screen like this and then you're using it like this. Yes, using your screen like this is actually very fancy and it looks good. Do you understand? Like, in fact, it was placed there to be used like that. There are certain things that you cannot shoot this way. Take for instance, you cannot actively, and I'm saying it, and this might be quite controversial, but you cannot actively shoot a wedding and shoot it well while shooting on this mode. Do you understand? And I have my reasons for saying that, because if you want to shoot and you have to balance off your camera on this hand, and for most people who use their cameras like this, what they do is that they actually use their hand for balance. They actually use it to operate the screen here, instead of actually having the screen towards them, more like this, and then actually operating the screen like this. Do you understand? So instead of doing that, what do we do? Or what do we see most of the time? We discover that people now actually relegate the hand that is meant to hold the camera underneath, and then they turn it into the hand that presses or that taps the screen to operate the screen. I saw this a couple of days, like I saw this a couple of weeks back, and then the first thing that came to my mind is that if you were shooting a portrait, you can actually do that. Like maybe you were having a portrait session, you can actually do that. You have the luxury of doing that. If you are shooting maybe a product, you can do that. In fact, if you are not the main shooter in a wedding or an event, you can actually do that because you have the luxury of time. You understand? You're not rushing to get shots. In fact, you're just thinking and framing properly and all of these things. But if you are the primary shooter at an event and a wedding or whatever event you're shooting, and it's a fast-paced event like a wedding, and you have your camera screen turned this way so as to just be fancy and just make people know that you have a flip screen, I think you're doing it wrong, because this is only going to slow you down. In between figuring out your settings, in between figuring out the settings on your trigger, your lens, everything. So imagine shooting with a 70-200 that is already very bulky. Imagine a 70-200 on this camera or an 85mm on this camera, and then with that whole load, remember this hand still has to press buttons here. This particular hand has to do all of these buttons, has to press all of these buttons. So if you now have to do all of those things and still attach a huge lens on this camera, which is now going to maybe triple the size of this camera and the weight of this camera, and then the hand that is meant to be used for support is now relegated. You have now removed that hand from doing its original duty to doing this. After a while, you discover that your hand will start shaking, your pictures will get shaky. In fact, you would not even be calm enough to get all the pictures you want to get. Do you understand? So instead of doing this, my advice for an upcoming photographer or a photographer in general, my advice to you is instead of leaving your screen flipped up this way for the swag of it, what you should actually do is to just turn your screen to yourself, so you can easily see what you want to do, or you can easily see what you're shooting, and then you can easily tap on your screen to operate your screen very easily, while also using your hand to support your camera. I know you might not agree with this, but to be fair, it's really stressful. Now, if you're shooting an event also, think about it. When you have like a lot of other photographers, you have a lot of other videographers, you have content creators, you have guests who are trying to get pictures too. Everyone is literally just pushing against you. Do you think this is the wisest way for you to carry your camera, or for you to use your camera? The Bible says wisdom is profitable to direct. It may end in tears and it may not end in tears, but my advice is actually just flip your screen. Like, it's not worth it. The downsides of having your screen this way when shooting an event, when shooting maybe a festival that has people pushing against you, is a lot. You can't actually do it this way. So instead of having your camera flipped this way, your camera screen flipped this way, just turn your camera screen to yourself so you can have ease. And then you know your LED screen is actually protected from anyone hitting your screen. Your LED screen is actually protected from getting damaged by anything. Do you understand what I'm saying? Your LED screen is within reach, so you can easily tap on it. So that's my advice to photographers. Now, moving on. In understanding your camera, you have to know there are certain buttons that were put on this camera, and they were not put there just for the fun of it. The button I actually want to talk about is this button, the lens release button. So this is where a lot of people get it wrong. The lens release button is actually put there to make putting on your lens very easy and removing your lens very easy. It makes putting in your lens cap very easy and removing it very easy. But what we have now is that a lot of people actually feel like the lens release button is just put there for some reason, and even if they press it and it's not coming through, they just force the lens off. What you're doing is that this part of the camera, you're actually wearing it out. There's a ring here. You are actually wearing this part of your camera out. So instead of actually doing that, what you can actually do is to always use your lens release button. So when you want to put in your lens and when you want to take off your lens, make sure to use your lens release button. So some people actually use it for only when they want to remove their lens, but then they don't use it when they want to put in their lens. So just always put your hands there when you want to slide your lens in, and then the moment you know it's about to lock, remove your hand so it can lock. Now, one of the key things that has really helped me in my journey as a photographer and a videographer is actually knowing the particular brand of camera that you shoot with. We have people who shoot every day with different cameras, and personally I don't feel like it's the best, because if you are able to shoot with one brand and understand one brand really well, you will discover that you'll be able to work the camera even with your eyes closed. So there are situations and there are things that happen where you actually have to move really fast. Take for instance, if you're a wedding photographer and you have to switch between modes, or maybe you have to switch between your settings, you have to quickly change your settings because you left inside of the church wedding and the couple, they are going outside for pictures, and then maybe it's a split-second moment that happens really fast. You have to master it. You have to know where the buttons are, like just off of the top of your head, instead of actually trying to figure out, oh my god, where is the ISO button, where is the shutter speed button, where should I... In fact, I've seen someone make a mistake of clicking another button instead of the shutter button during an important moment. Like, the person was busy struggling with another button that was on top of the camera instead of the shutter button. Don't get me wrong, we're all there once upon a time in our journey as a photographer and a videographer. But the truth about it is, if you're able to stick to a brand, then you will understand the workings of a brand. So what I advise photographers, videographers to actually do is, if you're sticking to Canon, stick to Canon. If you're sticking to Sony, stick to Sony. And this doesn't mean that you can't shoot with other brands, but your primary or your go-to brand is one particular brand, so you're able to understand and master it properly. I think it's general knowledge, but I'd say it. You should always have your camera set on manual mode. And what is manual mode? I think we walked through all of the different modes in our last class in understanding your camera. I'll just talk about the different modes, and I'm not going to speak about everything. I'll speak about what you need to know, and the rest you can research those on your own, because I personally, I don't use all of those modes, but then they are there for a reason. So your manual mode or your auto mode, if you're getting into photography as a beginner and you don't have plans to be a professional or go professional, I think the auto mode is your friend, because it helps you do everything automatically. Helps you pick exposure, help you pick everything. So you worry less about the settings and all. You worry less about all of these buttons. Now, the downside to that is that you are not able to manually configure your settings to your preference. That is, you're not able to move these settings and make them custom to whatever situation and the kind of pictures that you want. Now, we then have manual mode. Manual mode is a mode that allows you to actually control all of your settings. That is your ISO, shutter speed, aperture. It allows you to control everything. Do you understand? So that's what it's for. I know there's a sports mode here. I know there's a program mode. So basically, what you should actually have turned on is your manual mode. And if you don't know what an exposure triangle is, your exposure triangle consists of 3 different components, which are ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. Now, if you don't know about any of these 3, you should check our previous class on exposure triangle. So you're going to get a full knowledge on how to work your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture in that particular class. Now, moving on, I think the last thing I'm going to speak about in this particular class is actually in the handling of your camera. Now, we have a lot of photographers actually just using cameras in a way that is not best for the camera. If you mount your lens on your camera, we've already established that your camera is already bulky as it is. Then if you mount a lens on top of it, that means it becomes even more bulky. So if you continue to hold your lens and the camera like this, what are you doing? You are putting the entire weight of your lens and your camera on this lower part of your camera. And if you have a very bulky lens, you are putting the entire weight of that bulky lens on this particular ring here, this ring. And after a while, you discover that your camera would start malfunctioning and all. You don't want that, because that is in repairs. That will cost you a lot, and it will probably just ruin the camera. So instead of all of those things, what is best for you is that actually make sure to always support your camera from underneath your camera. Make sure that your hand doesn't go in. That is, when your camera is turned on and then your camera sensor is open, make sure that your thumb doesn't go in to touch it. Make sure that water doesn't enter it. So I feel like these are basics, but some people still make this mistake. So instead of making this mistake and costing yourself several thousands of dollars, please avoid those kind of mistakes and use your camera in the right way. In the next class, we are actually going to have a practical session where we'll teach you how to use your camera. So in understanding your camera, we've already done the session where we actually spoke about the history of a camera. We spoke about the workings of a camera, that is how a camera was built and what is inside of a camera. And in this class, we actually spoke about the handling of a camera, how you should handle a camera. In the next class, we are going to be discussing how to use your camera. So thank you so much for staying till the end. And if you would like to be a part of Belac Academy, please hit the link in the description below to register. Also, you can support us by liking this video, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. You can also turn on your notification bell so that you get notified the next time we drop our next video. Thank you for staying to the end, and we will see you in the next one.